everybody, it's Brie with Mako, and I am here to talk with you all about sea salt, which is my favorite glaze of all time. It can be used with pretty much anything, as long as you're firing it to cone 6. It loves to be with other glazes. It's really just the jack of all trades, which is pretty awesome. So I have a couple of little ideas to show you all about how I like to use sea salt and how I like to layer it with other glazes, and some fun little techniques that you can use with sea salt, but also with other glazes in general, specifically crystal glazes. So, first, it looks like it's a little bit fuzzy, so I'm going to try to move super slow so that things aren't as fuzzy. So, this is the image that was in the post earlier that you guys saw, so you can get a little bit of an idea of the crystallization of the glaze and also the movement that sea salt creates with having a nice neutral base. So the base of sea salt is actually alabaster, which is basically a creamy white glaze that is pretty non-reactive. It's pretty stable, and so really the only movement that we get is from the crystals themselves, with a little bit of an exception here or there. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about the crystals themselves. So this is an unopened jar of sea salt. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for you guys so that we can talk about crystals. If you guys have used crystals in the past, Mako crystals, then you know this, but our stoneware crystals, when they are packaged, they're heat sealed, so that's fun. But more importantly, all the crystals are at the bottom, and so we've got to stir up these glazes the first time that we get them. After that, you can just kind of shake them up and they'll be good to go. But before that, we really need to stir them. Now, ideally, it would be great if you stirred them with like a spoon or something, but you know, we're in the studio and I've got a little fan brush, so that's what I'm going to use. And I'm going to try to be super quiet so you guys can hear the noise, because there's an audible kind of change that happens from when the crystals are stuck on the bottom versus when they're distributed all around the glaze. So I'm going to move them kind of close to my microphone and see if you guys can hear this. Hear that part? It sounds like there's sand in there. And so the sand is really the crystals. Okay? Okay, so did you hear the difference when those crystals kind of started to break up and really kind of move? So I've got them stirred up a little bit, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the lid back on, and then I'm going to shake it, and then I'm going to stir again. And I think that you're going to notice there's a huge difference. Really getting those crystals moved around. Okay, now let's listen. Almost no sound at all. That's exactly what we want. Okay, that tells me that there aren't crystals sitting on the bottom of this glaze, because what makes all of these fun movements is the crystal itself. Okay, so we want to make sure that we have lots of those crystals. So I'm going to show you guys how I actually make this combo. And then I actually have a similar piece that I'm going to show you, because there's a difference between these two. They look fairly similar. Where's it at? Show you guys it up close. Hold it steady. Okay. So having those two glazes right next to each other, there is a fun application that I like to do specifically with sea salt that creates additional movement that you would otherwise not have with a glaze. And it's a little bit messy, but that's what being a potter is all about, right? So what we're gonna do is we're going to apply a nice heavy coat of sea salt on about the top 1/3 of this piece, and we're going to see what it looks like. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna create some false movement lines in that glaze while it's still wet. Okay, so, sorry guys, I'm trying to get my comments up. It looks as if we've got a couple of comments, but I can't see them. There we go. Oh, look, it's Adam. Stir it up. I did stir it up. And some hellos from the UK. Oh, I miss the UK. In February, I usually go to the UK, but not this year. Stupid COVID. Sorry. Okay, here we go. So, I'm gonna stir this up. Can you guys see that? I don't know if you can see those little crystals, but see how I'm stirring and you can kind of see those chunks on there? Those are the chunks that we want right on this piece. Okay, so I'm gonna get a nice, good coat. Don't be afraid if it drips. Drips are fine. We're in a studio. Actually, we're in the middle of my office, but it seems like a studio. Okay, I'm gonna create a little wavy line here. It doesn't have to be exact, but while it's still wet, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my hand, I don't know if you guys can see that there, take my hand and I'm gonna create these little waves. So can you guys see that little wave where this glaze is super thick and then where my fingers were is super thin, and it's gonna dry that way. So as it dries, here we go, here's a good side. So the parts where my finger drug are already dry, and the parts that my finger didn't drag on are wet still, which means that they got a thicker application than where I drug my fingers across. And that's what we want, because what's gonna happen is, I'm gonna show you on the actual finished piece, and I have funk on my hands. Hold please. Okay, so here's the sample. There's a good spot. Here we go, right here. So you can see this little drip, and then you can see this little set of drips, and then actually this little set of drips too. And that's where the fingers moved just like that. Okay, so the thickness, where the glaze is thicker, the glaze moves, and then where it's drier, it will stop the run from happening. Have you ever had one of those pieces where you thought it was going to look beautiful and it did look beautiful, but then it ran onto your shelf because there was too much glaze on there? This kind of gives you the movement of a lot of glaze without having to use a lot of glaze. So these two both have 2 coats of sea salt and 2 coats of Norse blue. This one, this side, has much more movement, especially right here on this side. See the movement on this piece all in here versus this piece also has movement. It just doesn't have as much dynamic movement as the piece that has the false run lines, I guess you could call them. Okay, so as we're drawing, we can kind of see these almost like little racing stripes that are happening. So we want our little racing stripes to dry, because if we added another layer of glaze on right now, we would basically just redistribute our thicker glaze again. And we don't want to do that. We want to apply another coat of glaze on the already thick type of glaze. Now you could do this, if you wanted to do it on the entire piece, you could do it on the entire piece and just kind of widen out your fingers. You know, you only get 4 unless you're really special and you have, you know, extras. I guess you could get your thumb in there. You could also use, I'm trying to think, like a comb, unless it's the wide prong combs, a thinner comb, A is going to take out all your crystals and B is going to be too close together. So we're really looking for a wide kind of application there. Okay, so now it's been a minute since I've used my sea salt glaze, and so those crystals might be more towards the bottom. So I'm really gonna dig down deep, which means that my brush kind of gets a little bit dirty, but that's okay. It's worth it. Now, if you wanted to, you could pour it out onto like a plate or something, but you need to make sure that you get the crystals in there, because the crystals are really the goods. That's what we want. That's what's making all of this movement happen, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and put our second coat on here, all the way around. It's okay if you don't get it on the exact spot, because it's all about making movement happen here. Okay, now while it's still wet, get your fingers out, wiggle around. Notice that I didn't paint the inside of this piece. I didn't paint the inside first because I want to be able to have my hand in there. Now, putting your hand inside of the piece may sound a little crazy, but it really makes it easier to be able to work on the outside of the piece. Now, if you have a banding wheel or something like that, that's great, except on a banding wheel, you have to paint this direction, right? So gravity is not your friend, versus when you put your hand inside and you turn it sideways, gravity is less of an issue. Now I'm seeing questions up here. Let me see what we got going on. Maria says, hi. Does this work with light and dark flux too? Absolutely, 1000%. This really works with any kind of crystal glaze or glaze that has a lot of movement by itself. So what are other glazes that are not crystals that have a lot of movement? Let's do some research. So let me move this aside. So you could do this with the Norse Blue, Coral Sands, Sand and Seas, that series that creates a lot of different variety when you're looking at the piece. Tiger's Eye would be great for this. Any glaze that changes color with the thickness could also be fun. Smoke Green Tea, those would all be nice. Copper Jade does it very well. Let's look. And pretty much all of the crystals. Any translucent glaze, so Amber Topaz, Root Beer, those sorts of glazes, Glacier Blue, Turquoise, Peacock, those ones, you have to be a little bit careful, because as they get thinner, they're going to be more translucent, which means you're going to see your base color more, which could be fun. But just something to keep in mind. Have you tried it on brown or really dark clay? Does it work with that? Great question. I don't use a ton of brown. I use a tan speckle. Same technique works on the tan speckle as well. I've never used it on a super dark clay, but I know that the technique will work. Now, the trick will be is if you have a glaze that likes to be on a dark clay body in general. And I know that we've done quite a lot of research. So maybe looking back through or looking on our website to see what glazes work well on really dark clay bodies. But if the glaze itself works on a dark clay body, this technique will work on it. Okay, so as we're waiting for this to dry, you can see how we're getting some running on this piece, which is perfect because it's not running all the way down the side, right? If you put two really thick coats of glaze and just let it sit up and let it dry, it would run all the way down. But this one's really not, because it's running and then it's stopping and it's hitting a spot that doesn't have nearly as much glaze on it. What about fluxes? Would you do this before putting on the flux? You could go either way. You could actually use this technique with flux. So instead of sea salt, put flux down and then do it on top of any glaze, and that would work really well. If I were to put flux on this, you can put flux on the top or on the bottom or in between. It really just depends on the aesthetic that you're looking for. I typically put my Flux on the top because I use Flux as like an addition if I'm applying glaze and I'm like, oh, I think I like a little bit more movement right there or a little bit more color, then I'll add a Flux on top. But you can also add it underneath, and you can also sandwich it between two layers, which can be fun as well. Now, these pieces and the cute little handled mug, these all have Norse blue applied 2 coats over everything, except for the bottom, of course. Now, this glaze is going to take a little bit longer to dry because of the technique, and so I'm not going to apply the Norse blue right away. I'm going to show you a couple of other tricks of things that you can do with sea salt itself, and one of them involves a paintbrush. I like the ones that have the little angled handled. These are Meiko's acrylic handled series, which I really appreciate. But you can actually take these crystals out if you are looking to have movement in maybe one section and then one section not movement and then another section. You could take out these crystals and it will perform just like alabaster, because the base coat or the base glaze of sea salt is actually alabaster. And so another fun way to do that is to actually just paint a stripe of alabaster and then paint a stripe of sea salt. Will give you a very similar effect. But removing crystals or redistributing crystals is another fun way to be able to use these glazes. So if I was really looking for a drip to have a lot of movement, I could crystal load it, where I take some of the crystals that I took from other places and load them all in one area to really create a lot of movement on a single drip. Now, that being said, you need to pay attention to where you're at in relation to the base of the piece, because what you don't want to do is add a whole bunch of crystals to one particular area and then have just that part of the glaze run and potentially run onto your shelf. So you just want to be cognizant of that in your application. Okay, so alabaster is the base coat for sea salt. There's a whole bunch of other crystal glazes that their bases work well with other glazes. Now, on the glaze jars themselves, most of them, we're updating them as we go, but most of them will tell you what the base of that crystal glaze is. So if you happen to run out of, let's say I ran out of sea salt, but there's a bunch of crystals left in the bottom for whatever reason, under the tips and suggestions, it will tell you what the base coat or the base glaze is for that crystal, so that you're able to maybe add some more alabaster or something to your crystal loading if that's what you need. Oop, there's some questions. Let me see what we got here. Okay, good. So if alabaster works with your dark clay body, then this would definitely work for you, Lisa. So go ahead and try that out. Make sure you give us pictures, post pictures so that we can see what it looks like, because that's always fun to go back and see. Let's see what else we got. Does Meiko sell or have plans to sell just the crystals from their glaze? That is a great question. It gets brought up fairly regularly, and it's not something that we're looking at doing it right now. But it's always, kind of an option for the future, because it is an additive into the glazes that we have. So maybe someday is the answer. I think that as the line evolves, there's a solid chance that could happen. So thanks for that question, though. Okay, awesome, guys. Well, if you have any other questions about crystals or sea salt in general, by all means, send it over. The reason that I love sea salt so much is because I feel like it just brightens up every glaze. So if If you see this one, it's light at the top where it's mostly sea salt. But look at this blue down here. I'm trying to get it real close so you guys can see it. Okay, see how bright that blue is? It just is stunning. I love it. I could talk about sea salt all day, but you know, no one wants to sit here and listen to that. So if you guys have questions, put them in the comments. I'll be around and I'll answer them. And be safe and have a great holiday season. See ya!
عالم الهوايات بأسعار الجملة، تشتري خامات مضمونة ومواصفات عالمية.